Okay, so we began our screenwriting journey with your log line, and the log line was the what is it, right? You all had to come up with the log line, the one sentence for what is it. That log line was great for your pitch. That log line was great to help you pitch your idea, to help you sell your screenplay to a producer, to a collaborative team, to so on and so forth. But now you're going to begin writing your screenplay. That log line still applies. Okay? The log line is still important. The log line is there as a writing tool to help you build and create your screenplay. It's a really good idea to take that log line and write it down and keep it with you as you're doing your writing. So use your log line. It was not just busy work. It is actually a tool to make your films better. Okay? The log line will help you stay focused. Okay? It will help you stay focused, and it will help you to keep it simple. Stupid. Write it down on a Post-it note as you type. Stick it on your screen and have it there. You will find that oftentimes you will start to stray from your original log line. And that log line is there to pull you back and to help you stay on target. Stay on target. Stay on target. Okay? Every narrative film needs a story arc, right? And a story arc is not complete without some type of conflict. Typically, you have a story arc, which is an external conflict, or an external factor, right? The story is the external factor, and your conflict is what's happening on the interior. That's what's going on with your character, right? But then you also have your character arc. These are the wants and needs that you've heard so much about. Character wants this, but character really needs this, right? Okay? And this is the story arc. This is the external thing that forces the change for this to happen. This is not going to happen unless this forces that character to do so. Right? Why would this character change unless they are without anything forcing them to change? Okay? We talked about the hero's journey, your 3 acts. We talked about that junior year. You guys know that, beginning, middle, and an end. We talked about movie genres, the 10 kinds of movie genres from Save the Cat. You can also use a beat sheet, which I'll talk about in a little bit. These are all tools to help you stay on target. It's not a bad idea to write these things down. This is my character arc. At the beginning, I want my character to be like this. At the end of the film, I want my character to be like this. This is my story. I must do this in the first act, this in the second act, this in the third act. I've seen screenwriters put down scenes on note cards, kind of like what you did with storyboards last year, only instead of drawing pictures, they just wrote them down, and then they would organize them and shuffle them around and say, this needs to go in the first act, this needs to go in the second act, this needs to happen after this needs to happen before this, and that helped them organize and prioritize all of the things that they needed to happen. I've seen other screenwriters make like a nice big timeline where they just put little dots where, okay, this needs to happen at this point in the film, this needs to happen by this point, this needs to happen at this point. It's basically a beat sheet, but in a timeline fashion. Okay? Anything to help you stay on target. Because if you don't stay on target, you'll wind up somewhere completely different. It's okay if you want to change your log line because it turns out you're more interested in something else, but then you need to go back and write your screenplay from the start again to make sure that that new log line remains consistent throughout. Make sense? Cool? Cool. All right, so here's a quick little video. He's just going to give us in 40 seconds the very basic structure of a typical narrative.
Whatever you're doing, keep the story simple. Establish the world, introduce conflict through an inciting incident, develop that conflict with protagonist and antagonist, lead to a climax, and resolve and conclude. That type of structure is the most common film structure. In the case of a short, it's self-contained and it's easy. Something bad happens, somebody needs to fix it, somebody fixes it or fails. That is the fundamental building block of narrative, and in particular, when working in a short, this is going to be really important.
Okay, this is the same thing that we talked about in our previous lessons, right? We went through the hero's journey, we looked at all of that, we looked at all of the stages over here, from the ordinary world all the way to the end, to the return with elixir. We looked at the graph, and how the whole thing has a first act and a second act and a third act. We had the ordinary world entering into the special world. These are all the things that he's talking about, but he's talking about in very basic forms, just the basic building blocks of narrative. Character has a problem, they must need to overcome the problem, they overcome the problem or fail, and it's resolved. Whatever we bring up in the first act in the ordinary world is resolved by the time that we return back into the ordinary world. The same, but different, right? Okay. In his book, Save the Cat, Blake Snyder addresses these same stages that we talked about, only he calls them by different names. And these are names that he uses. These are often names that are used within the industry. But if you read these names, you can kind of see how they're exactly the same things that we've already discussed from the monomyth, right? Opening image, for example, is what? It's the beginning of your film, and it's the ordinary world, right? Okay. The catalyst. What's the catalyst?
Introduce the new world. The herald.
It's the herald, right? The call to action, right? That's the catalyst, right? The debate. Refusal of the call, right? Okay. Breaking into two. This is where you leave the first act and go into the second act. So that would be what? Crossing a threshold. Very good. B story. That's just a fancy word for like the other story that's happening. So for example, in Finding Nemo, you've got Nemo in the little tank at the dentist's office. That's the B story of Finding Nemo. Okay. Harder to fit into a film of your size, but easier in a TV episode or in a longer format of a film. The promise of the premise. Fun and games. This is tests, allies, and enemies. This is all that stuff in the second act. All the fun stuff, the stuff that you see on the movie poster, that kind of deal. All is lost. Dark night of the soul. What does that sound like?
Abyss.
That's the great abyss, right? That's the ordeal, the abyss, the whale in Finding Nemo, right? Okay. We're breaking into the third act. We have a nice big finale. Final image sounds like what? Well, yeah, it's the final shot. But what is the final image in the context of our stages? Return with the elixir. And what do you notice he's done here with these names?
They both have the word image.
Yes, thank you, Owen. Can you define why that's important?
Well, because same but different.
It's the same but different. It's the same but different.
Because that's his final instead of opening.
Very good, Owen. You can read. Okay. So the same but different. Okay, so I'm going to show you a little clip here. This is a great clip from the movie adaptation. Has anyone seen this?
Oh, no.
Okay, this is Nicolas Cage. So Nicolas Cage plays this character. He plays two characters, two twin brothers, actually. And he plays an aspiring screenwriters. And one is very eccentric, and one is very like full of anxiety and anxious and not very confident. He wants to write this deep and profound, meaningful story, whereas the other twin just wants to do like a Hollywood mindless blockbuster kind of a thing. What's interesting about this film is it's all very reflexive. The film that we're watching is the film that they're writing while we're watching the film. Yeah. And the screenwriters are the characters that you're watching. Like the names of the screenwriters are the characters in the film. So it's all very reflexive. I watched this film. I took a class in college called Reflexivity in Film. Films about the film that you're watching right now, and it's all very meta. Anyway, so this is this great scene from adaptation where he gives in and this guy who wants to write this deep and profound story full of meaning and all this kind of stuff that's true to life, and he goes to this Hollywood blockbuster seminar guy, which is based off of a real character. There's this guy who does these seminars in Hollywood, and he's very well known, and he's very formulaic in his approach to writing. He's also known for his mouth. He swears a lot and cusses a lot and things like that. And he's known for yelling at people and things like that. So they sort of spoofed him. This real guy, they sort of spoofed him here in the story, and the guy who plays him does a great job. But here's Nicolas Cage as this introverted character wanting to write this deep and profound story, and he raises a question to this particular guy at this particular seminar. A little bit of language in here for you.
Okay, thank you. We have a long 3 days ahead. Years from now, you'll be standing around a posh cocktail party congratulating yourself on how you spent an entire weekend locked in a room with an asshole from Hollywood for your art.
I am pathetic. I am a loser.
So, what is the substance of writing?
I have failed. I am panicked.
First,
I have sold out. I am worthless.
last,
what the fuck am I doing here? What the fuck am I doing here? Fuck! It is my weakness, my ultimate lack of conviction that brings me here. Easy answers, rules to shortcut yourself to success. And here I am, because my jaunt into the abyss brought me nothing. Well, isn't that just the risk one takes for attempting something new? I should leave here right now. I'll start over. I need to face this project head on
and God help you if you use voiceover in your work, my friends. God help you. It's flaccid, sloppy writing. Any idiot can write voiceover narration to explain the thoughts of a character. Okay, that's it. 1 hour for lunch. You cannot have a protagonist without desire. It doesn't make any sense. Any fucking sense. You follow? Good. Anyone else? Yes.
Sir, what if a writer is attempting to create a story where nothing much happens, where people don't change, they don't have any epiphanies, they struggle and are frustrated and nothing is resolved? More a reflection of the real world.
The real world?
Yes, sir.
The real fucking world. First of all, you write a screenplay without conflict or crisis, you'll bore your audience to tears. Secondly, nothing happens in the world? Are you out of your fucking mind? People are murdered every day. There's genocide, war, corruption. Every fucking day, somewhere in the world, somebody sacrifices his life to save somebody else. Every fucking day, someone somewhere takes a conscious decision to destroy someone else. People find love. People lose it. For Christ's sake, a child watches a mother beaten to death on the steps of a church. Someone goes hungry. Somebody else betrays his best friend for a woman. If you can't find that stuff in life, then you, my friend, don't know crap about life. And why the fuck are you wasting my 2 precious hours with your movie? I don't have any use for it. I don't have any bloody use for it.
Okay, thanks.
Like it's meant to be a little over the top, like they're spoofing a character and they're kind of poking fun at him in a little bit of a way. But there is some truth to that. You would be surprised how often I get students who bring in a screenplay and we read it in class and nothing happens. Like, something needs to happen in your stories. If nothing happens, you will bore your audience to tears. And he makes a valid point. Like, why are you wasting my time with it? Like, nothing is happening. Nothing is changing. That's not interesting, even if it's a reflection on the real world, right? So kind of a fun little clip. So for starters, we're going to talk about building strong characters. One of the easiest ways to make a good screenplay and write a good story is to write strong characters. Some of you will have this experience. Some of you are going to love screenwriting. Some of you are going to adore screenwriting. There's always students every year who are like, screenwriting is my favorite. That's what I want to do. That's what I want to move on with in life. One of the ways that you can really get the most out of your screenplay, one of the ways that you can really write something that you're proud of, that people identify with, is to develop strong characters. And there's a couple of different ways that you can do that. But if you do it right, it can be a really rewarding experience. Someone in this room is going to have this experience where you start writing and the characters start to really develop their own personalities, their own traits, and they start dictating the story for you. It's a really cool thing. It happened to me in college when I started writing my first screenplay. I'd sit there and I'd sit down, I was working on a feature-length one, and I'd sit down and I'd say to myself, well, I wonder what's going to happen today. And because at that point, the characters were strong enough, to me anyway, that I understood, oh, this character is going to say this, and this character is going to do this, and this one would obviously react in this way. And then I was discovering scenes and conversations and pieces of dialogue that I had no idea was going to happen. I knew the basic story arc. I knew where I wanted the character to end up. I knew how I wanted the story to go, essentially, in terms of what needed to be overcome. But but there were all of these fun new things that were happening along the way that I never anticipated. And I never would have figured out, except that the characters were strong enough that they started writing themselves. And that's really cool, when you become less of a writer and more of a viewer, really. As you watch the world that you've created sort of take on a life of its own. It's a really cool experience. It's a fun experience. And I'm hoping that some of you get a taste of that as you begin writing your screenplays. A good way to develop strong characters is to follow what's called the Covenant of the Ark. Get it? Because it's like the Ark of the Covenant, but it's Covenant of the... I didn't make up the joke. Okay. The Covenant of the Ark, which dictates that all of your characters must change. All of your characters must change. You have a little sidekick, you got a mom or a dad in the film, you've got somewhere over here, you've got a teacher, like whatever it is. All of your characters must change, except the bad guy, except the villain, except the shadow. The villain is the villain by definition because they do not change, right? If the villain changed, then they had potential, right? They have growth, right? So everyone must change. This is easier to do in a feature-length film. This is easier to do in a 2-hour film. You're making an 8 to 10 minute film. A little more difficult to do, especially if you have more than just a couple characters, right? But this is something that you need to take into consideration. Do all of your characters change? When I was in college, I took a great screenwriting class from a really cool teacher who suggested that after you finished your first draft of your screenplay, you go back and you write it with one individual character in mind. And then you go back and you revise it again, only this time you revise it with a different character in mind. And you just focus on that one character throughout the whole revision. Then you go back, revise it with another character in mind. So by the end of all your revisions, you develop a screenplay in which all of the characters are strong and all of the characters follow this rule and really develop and grow and benefit from having a revision that was focused on them. Make characters relatable. Make them memorable. Make them likable. Snyder talks about Save the Cat. This is where the title of the book, Save the Cat, comes from. The idea that you can make a character likable by creating some moment of empathy for them and your audience. So for example, we're watching Aladdin, right? Aladdin is singing and stealing stuff and having a grand old time. And you say to yourself, well, hang on, stealing is wrong. I know that stealing is wrong. My mother taught me that. But he seems to be enjoying himself. I'm trying to figure him out as a character. And then as soon as the song ends, he runs away. He has his bread. What does he do?
He gets caught.
No, he doesn't get caught. He gives it to the kids. There's these 2 little orphan kids, doughy-eyed kids, scrounging around for food. And immediately, Aladdin gives them the food. And what do we go? Oh, God, my heart. Aladdin is such a gem. Aladdin is such a nice guy. Boy, I like him. I'm really rooting for him now. I'm emotionally invested in him as a character, okay? You see these Save the Cat moments all the time in television, in movies, in stories. Things that happen early on in the film, things that happen in your first act that create a sense of empathy for your character. Doesn't necessarily have to be giving some orphan children some food or literally saving a cat, or whatever it might be. It's a moment where your character can become likable because you have created a moment of empathy between your audience and the character. Well, what does that do? That gets your audience to relate to the character. That makes your audience like the character. All of a sudden, your audience becomes invested in that character. They want them to succeed. Well, now they're putting something into your film. They're working for you now. Right? We've got them to feel something. Some admiration or some love or some respect or some concern for your character. Now they want to know what happens to them. That's what keeps your audience engaged. Anyone watch House of Cards by chance? Anyone?
Mateo.
Oh, Mateo, he's not here.
Well, I've seen like the first season.
In the very beginning of House of Cards, they do the exact opposite of this. Because for this exact reason. They want you to see what kind of a character this particular character is. So you see the first 5 minutes of House of Cards, you have this exact same thing, but in the inverse of it. Rather than create empathy for a character, it makes it very clear what kind of a character we're observing.
Was it the thing with the dog?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's literally the opposite.
Save the dog.
Yeah. Well, no, because it's not a cat, so it's a dog, and it's not saved. So, okay, you get the idea. All right. Up the stakes. Up the stakes. Okay? A good way to get your audience to be a little more invested in your film and to develop strong characters is to up the stakes of what is at stake. So let's say, for example, you've got a big math test. You've got a film about someone who's really trying to pass this big math test. Well, that's okay. That's not bad. I can relate to that, I suppose. I was a student once. I remember what it's like to be worried about math tests. But we need to up the stakes. So what happens if we don't pass the math test?
Don't get into college.
Okay, that's not a serious answer. Sorry.
Like if it's the SAT, then you have to have to take it again, or maybe you have to take maybe your mom said you have to.
Okay, so it's the SAT. It's not a math test. It's the SAT. Okay, that raises the stakes. What happens if the student doesn't pass the SAT? They're not going to be able to go to college. Okay, what happens if that student can't get into college?
He can't get his job, kick him out.
His parents are going to kick him out. And if he gets kicked out, what's going to happen? He's going to be broke on the street. And if he's broke on the street, then he'll never be able to what?
Succeed in life.
Become a professional lawnmower.
Become a professional lawnmower. And that is what's at stake.
A human lawnmower.
Okay? Do you see how you can build stakes one upon the other upon the other? It doesn't matter what it is, right? But you can build the stakes. But you need to show the audience what's at stake. You need to show the audience that they have something to lose. So that I can see, well, yeah, this is really important. Because if they don't do this, then this and this and this and this and this. Right? Passing the math test is one thing. If I don't pass the math test, I'm not going to get into college. And I have this great scholarship and this great opportunity. Or this or that. Or I really need to go to this college because the person I'm in a relationship with is going to this college. And we have to be together, and that's most important. Or that's basically the premise of Bill and Ted, actually. Up the stakes. Whatever you've got, up the stakes. Make it more dramatic than it necessarily starts from in the beginning. In his book, he talks about raising the stakes in the form of primal motivation. If you can get your character to be motivated in a primal way, that's something that rings true for everyone. So what are the things psychologically? Has anyone taken a psychology class by chance? Okay. What are the psychological psychiatrists tell us that we all have 4 or 5 human needs that we have to have, right? What are they? Do you know?
Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
I don't know.
I don't remember them, but I know.
Anybody? Well, we need to live, okay? So that's for starters. So we need to live. So if you're making a monster in the house, you got one right built in. You need to live. Okay, what else? Yeah. Fulfillment. We need to feel important. Believe it or not, that's one. We need to feel important. Okay, yeah?
Maybe I don't know, compassion or connection to others.
We need to love and be loved. That's one of them. Okay, so we need to feel important. We need to be valued, right? We need to feel love and to give love in return. We need to live. Any others?
Self-actualization.
That's kind of like feeling important, right? Okay, so there are others that psychologists tell us these are actual human needs that we all have. They're ingrained in us at a certain level. Yeah.
You probably need I don't want to say not something to do, but you need a purpose. Your individual thing is benefiting someone else.
Okay. I think that's to feel important or valued. I think there's also one in there about variety. We have to do something that's different from time to time. I don't know. I haven't taken a psychology class in a really long time. But if you can call upon one of these primal motivations and put that into your story as a character, all of a sudden that character starts to ring true for a lot of your audience. Right? All of a sudden they can see what's at stake. They can connect with them. They can have that moment of empathy. And if your character is now a source of empathy for your audience, now they're invested in your film. Now they care. Now they want to watch it all the way until the end. Okay. Ultimately, give me a story about a character that I can identify with, that I can learn from, that I have a compelling reason to follow, that I believe deserves to win, and has stakes that are primal or stakes that ring true for me. Okay? You've seen the posters around my wall. They're my favorite movies. I don't put up posters for you guys. I put them up for me because they're my favorite movies, right? And if you look at the posters on my wall, you start to notice that a lot of them are kind of the same type of movie. We've talked about how I really like Golden Fleeces. A lot of these are Golden Fleeces. But there's more to it than that. If you look at the characters in a lot of these films, a lot of the characters are essentially the same character. Indiana Jones is basically Han Solo. I mean, literally. But he's also Bill Murray in Ghostbusters, and he's also Ferris Bueller, and he's also the guy from Die Hard, and he's also Marty McFly from Back to the Future, and so on and so forth and so on and so forth, right? I am drawn to that particular kind of character. I identify with that particular kind of character. For whatever reason, whether it's deep-rooted in psychological, I don't know. But for whatever reason, that character inspires me. I'm drawn to that particular character. You have characters that you are repeatedly drawn to, and stories that you were repeatedly drawn to. Use that to your advantage as you're writing your screenplays, because you're already familiar with that. That's in your wheelhouse. You can find that voice easily. You can identify with that easily. So use that as an advantage and write things that feel true to you, that are true to your life and your life experience, and that will help you find voices in an easier way that will help you have strong characters. Okay, we're going to talk about pacing. Pacing, because pacing is something that we all struggle with, whether it's in post-production or whether it's the writing process in pre-production. So, to help you stay in a good pace for your writing, for your film, remember your 3-act structure. Last year we did this with note cards, right? We dropped them all along the floor. This was our first act, this was our second act, this was our third act. Those rules still apply, only now you're doing it with pages instead of note cards. If you write 5 pages and your first act is just finishing, well, guess what? You're looking at a, what? 17-minute film, right? Give or take. Okay? If you're writing a 1-page first act, well, now you're looking at something much shorter. Okay? So keep your pacing and remember your 3-act structure. If your script is boring, your film will be boring. Okay? I'm going to repeat myself. If your script is boring, your film will be boring. One more time for the people in the back of the room. If your script is boring, your film will be boring. Story is king. If you have a good story, it doesn't matter how bad or how rotten your acting or your effects are. People will still enjoy it. If you have a rotten story that is boring, it doesn't matter how good your effects are. It doesn't matter how good of an editor you are. It doesn't matter if you've got the greatest actors in the world. If your script is boring, your movie will be boring, because story is king. Story is the most important thing that you've got. Okay? Last year I had a student, gave me a screenplay. I read it. I didn't mince words. I wrote, gave her a bunch of notes, and I wrote on her screenplay, "This is boring. I am bored. You need to adjust this. You need to fix this. You need to address this." She did not heed my counsel. No. It'll be different when I film it with my friends. You'll see. It'll be funny when I do it with my friends. It'll be funny. It was not funny. It was not funny. It was not funny at all. Some of you even know what I'm talking about.
Wait, are we going to get to watch this one? I'm going to.
No, it's not. No.
That's junior.
No. Okay. If your script is boring, your film will be boring. Okay? No amount of anything will save it. Okay? So don't move on from your script until it's ready. Okay? I'm giving you time to write it. I'm giving you time to get feedback on it. You do have a green light deadline because we have to move on. Okay? But work hard at it so that you meet that deadline. Because if you don't have a solid ground floor, you can't build a house on it. That's all there is to it. Story is king. It's the most important part. And there's something really cool about having a completed, finished screenplay, right? When we write screenplays, we can write whatever we want. We can cast whoever we want. You can see the movie in your head. You can cast George Clooney. You can shoot on the moon. It doesn't matter. And when you're finished with that screenplay, it's finished. You have a tangible, finished product that you can share with people, and that's awesome. That's super cool. And there's nothing can go wrong in pre-production, right? There's no problems with production. There's no skill level of your editing skills or effect skills that keep you from achieving whatever you want to achieve when you're writing in pre-production. That is so cool and rewarding, right? Because you can actually share this product when you're done with people and they can see the movie in their head. And that's rewarding, and that's really, really cool. So don't make it boring. Like, make it awesome. Write what you want. Like, write as if you can do anything you want, because that's the kind of screenplay that you want. That's the kind of story that you want. Don't make it boring. Do not make it boring. Get to the point already. A good way to fix your pacing is just get to the point. Don't hem and haw. If you're writing a scene because you need character A to tell character B something, don't beat around the bush. Don't drag the scene out for 3 pages. Get to the point. Like, why do we have this scene? Scenes are there for a reason. They're there to expedite the process. Sometimes characters are there for a reason. They're there to expedite the story, make things happen, right? Get to the point. You only have 8 to 10 minutes to tell this story. I mean, some of you might go over, right? But that's what you're kind of aiming for, right? 8 to 10 minutes. So you don't have a lot of time. That's not a lot of time. You're going to write these screenplays, and it's going to be way easy for you to fill 10 pages. Like, most of you will have a harder time cutting it down. A lot of you are going to go whoosh right past 10 pages. It's not hard. Once you do the formatting and all that kind of stuff, it's real easy to get way past 10 pages, okay? So get to the point. Don't bore your audience. Keep the story moving. Map out your beats or use an outline like a beat sheet. A beat sheet is kind of what I showed you before with all the different things. You can actually download templates, beat sheets that will say, if you're writing, for example, a 120-page screenplay, by page 25, this needs to happen. By page 30, this needs to happen, and so on and so forth. And you can actually have that beat sheet with you and address it and be like, oh, yeah, here I am on page 10, and here's what I need to be. Yep, all right, I'm good, I'm on track, so on and so forth. You can even get beat sheet templates for short films. And they can help you. Like, well, by this time you need this, and by this time you need this, by this time you need this. This is one of the reasons why people really like Blake Snyder and Save the Cat, because he can really help new writers make a nice story that works and has all the moving parts. This is also why he has some critics, because his critics say, oh, you're making writing too formulaic, and everyone's just following a roadmap, and all the stories feel the same, okay? Well, we're all new at this. We're all kind of amateurs at this together, right? So I think it's best that we all sort of learn the rules first before we learn when and how to break them, right? Okay? So keep these things in mind. Keep these things in mind. And, you know, the formula works for a reason. You can tell any kind of story within this formula. But there's a reason why the pacing works and why your audience doesn't get bored. Arrive late and leave early. I've said this before, but you can do this with your scenes. You can do this with your dialogue. For example, here's this little scene that I wrote. You're late to class again. And Josh says,
I'm sorry, Mr. T, there's an incident.
I'm sorry, Mr. T, there was an incident. An incident?
Yeah, there was this chicken.
Save it, sit down, and don't let it happen again. Okay, this is the scene. It's kind of fun. Josh comes running in. He sees, talks about a chicken. That's weird. We're all like, what? A chicken? And I tell him to shut up and sit down. Okay? All right? But we can trim this down and we can get to the point. We can arrive late and we could leave early.
Yes, Mr. T.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Josh. All right, so we're going to arrive late and leave early. So now the door swings open. In runs Josh.
I'm sorry, Mr. T, there's an incident.
An incident?
Yeah, there's this chicken.
And
crossing the road.
And that's the scene. And now you've got more time for us to react to each other. I can sit here and look at Josh, and he can be there like, a chicken. And there's some humor there, and there's some comedy there that can be fun and interesting. Okay, we don't need this stuff. You're late to class again. Okay, I don't need to say that. I don't need to tell you that, right? Like, you're smart audience. You can see him running in late. You can see the clock, right? This is show, don't tell, right? He comes running in. We all know what it looks like to be late. We've all been late before. Okay, I don't need to shove it down your throat and say, as a character, this character is late, audience, because you're too thick to understand it or something. Okay, no one wants that, right? Okay, we can start with the get to the point already, right? In comes Josh, he runs in, I'm sorry, there was an incident. Yeah, there was this chicken, all right? And I don't need any of this stuff. Save it, sit down, don't let it happen again. We know what teachers say when you're late to class, right? What's really important in this scene? That Josh is late and that he has some weird story and some weird reason for why that happened, right? That's the only thing that's important. And that's all contained within these 3 lines. Well, now you just saved yourself a bunch of time. You just saved yourself a bunch of time for other stuff that's more important. And you're not boring your audience with things that they already know. Last year I told you that great filmmakers are great manipulators, right? We can get our audience to feel what we want them to feel. We can get them to think what we want them to think in any given moment, right? Okay? But if we're sitting there shoving it down their throat, they're not going to listen to us. Right? They're not going to listen to us. They're going to sit here and be like, yeah, I get it. He's late. I get it, It's just not as powerful as if we let the audience see things and figure things out for themselves and fill in the blanks. Right? That's more powerful. That's more powerful. All right, the same rule applies to dialogue. Okay? So find the voice for your character, have fun with it. Okay? It's a lot of fun, but make it authentic. Okay? And show, don't tell. If you are writing a role for a big CEO of a big company, it's really important that the dialogue flows like a CEO of a big company and doesn't sound like a 17-year-old in high school. Okay? So if you don't think you can write like a big CEO of a big company, maybe do a little research. Why don't you pull up some interviews of a big CEO of a company and see what kind of words and phrases the CEO uses and interject that into your writing. Or have an adult who you think can mimic that sort of language, because you need the language, you need the vocabulary, you need the syntax and the tone, right? You don't want all of your characters to sound like a 17-year-old in high school. It doesn't work. It's not going to sound authentic, and your audience won't believe it. Okay? And don't be on the nose. This is the same kind of thing with don't shoving things down your audience's throat, right? Let your audience figure things out. So for example, oh, Juliet, I love you. And Juliet says, yes, but we can never be together because of so many external factors. And Romeo says, I know, that kind of sucks. And Juliet says, agreed. Okay? It's very on the nose. I'm telling the audience what they're feeling. I'm telling the audience what they're thinking. I'm telling the audience that there are so many external factors. Okay? This is shoving it down the audience's throat. Okay? This is not going to require any thinking on the part of my audience. This is not going to require any engagement on the part of my audience. Okay? My audience is just going to turn their mind off. They're being spoon-fed everything. This is not a film. This is a movie. Okay? But we can leave this more and make it more open to interpretation. We can rewrite this scene. For example, oh, Juliet, there are so many things I want to say. Okay, well, now I'm intrigued. What does Romeo want to say? Well, now I'm thinking about it already. Okay, what is he trying to say? What does he want to say? Why can't he say it? Juliet looks knowingly at Romeo, then off into the distance. You mustn't. I know. Okay, well now I'm like, oh, well, what's he not saying? What's he not saying, and why mustn't he not say it? Okay, this is more interesting because you're leaving it open to interpretation. Now your audience, is sitting here thinking about these things, and guess what? Your audience is filling in the blanks with everything that's applicable to their own life. Because they're putting themselves into the characters, right? And your audience is always going to come up with something that's more powerful to your audience than you will. So now we've manipulated our audience, for lack of a better phrase. We've manipulated our audience into thinking and feeling whatever we want these characters to think and feel. Right? So instead of shoving it down their throats, we've now gotten our audience to participate in the act of the movie writing itself. Your audience is writing the scene for themselves. And the audience always likes what they do better than what you do, right? Because that's human nature, right? We always think our ideas are best, right? Well, now your audience is feeling more empathetic. They're feeling more compassionate. They're more connected. They are now invested in your film. They're engaging. You have your audience working for you. Okay, that's what you want to do. That's how you get your audience to be like, oh yeah, I'm all in. That's the difference between a film and a movie. Okay? All right. We do this with visual writing as well. You don't need dialogue if you can do it visually, right? Show, don't tell, right? Can you see the movie in your head? When you're writing the movie, you need to write what we see. Okay? If somebody picks up a box off the floor or rummages through a bunch of papers, you need to write that in the screenplay, because when we're looking at the screenplay, your audience doesn't have the benefit of seeing the movie on the screen. So if it's on the screen in your movie, if you see it in your head and it's on the screen in your movie, you need to include that in the screenplay. Okay? Write it visually. Show, don't tell. But, do not direct from the writer's desk. Do not put camera shots in your film. Camera zooms in to reveal. No. What did you do? You just told me that I'm watching a movie. You just ruined the creation of your world. You just told me it was all make-believe. Don't take me out of the film. Don't ruin my suspension of disbelief. Okay? Plus, if you're trying to sell your screenplay, no director wants you, the writer, to tell him or her how to do their job. Right? Okay? That's their job, to figure out how they want to shoot and edit your film. Okay? So don't say, I'm doing a, Zolly close-up of this on, no. You can call for shots in creative ways. For example, Josh runs in, his eyes wide and a gaze. Okay, well, I just called for a close-up of his face. Any good director worth their salt knows that if we're going to see how big and wide-eyed he is, I'm going to need a close-up of his face. Okay, so there are creative ways that you can kind of call for shots, but don't actually put camera moves or shots into your screenplay. We're not making a production script, right? We're not making a shooting script. We're making a screenplay. Okay. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to talk about killing your darlings, sometimes called killing your babies. Right? How many of you have heard this phrase, killing your darlings? Anybody? Okay. This is basically, sometimes you have a scene or a character that you really like, but it's ruining your pacing, or it's ruining your film, or it's just not working. So you need to ask yourself, as you're writing all this stuff, why does this character exist? Okay? Why does this character exist? Okay? A lot of times you'll have multiple characters, 3, 4, 5 characters. Last year I had a student film. This guy brought in a film. He had 6 characters in his film. I said, why do you need 6 characters in your film? He says, oh, well, just, I need them. I need all 6 of these guys. And I said, okay, tell me how they're different. Tell me how these 6 people are all different. He couldn't even tell me how 2 of them were different, let alone 6. And I said, no, you don't need 6 characters. You need like 3, maybe 4. He said, no, I need all 6. I said, no, you just want 6 because I can tell you have 6 friends that you want to cast in your film. Well, guess what? That's way too much work. You're not going to have any memorable characters. They're not going to be strong characters because they're all exactly the same. And he put his head down and he smiled and said, yeah, I know, you're right. He had 6 friends that he wanted to cast in his film. So he trimmed it down. He got it down to 4 characters. It was much better as a result. The screenplay actually started to work because the characters were more relatable because they were different. They each had their own character arc. And that was nice. So ask yourself, why do I have this character? What's the point of this character? Are they just there to move the story along? If so, why do you need that character? Are there other ways to move the story along? Or do you have a character that you've already created that could take on the job of moving the story along in that particular scene or moment? Right? That'll happen to a lot of you. We'll read your screenplay and I'll say, I don't think you need this character. Why don't you just have the mom do that part? Oh yeah, I didn't think about that. Yeah. Okay? Why does this scene exist? Do the same thing with your scenes. Why does this scene exist? Does the scene exist only to move something along? Sometimes you have to move stuff along. Right? Other times, what's most often seems to be, we'll have a scene that's there for jokes. And I'll say, why do you have this scene? Is it expediting the story? No. Is it showing me any kind of character development? No. Am I learning anything new about the personality or about the world? Is it world building? No. Well, why have this? Well, it's really funny, Mr. Taylor. It's really funny. I said, yeah, it's great. It's hilarious. But it's ruining your pacing. It's getting in the way of your film. Take it out and save it for a different project. Because right now it doesn't fit. I had this problem. My first year teaching, great film student, really, really sharp, went to Emerson. Really sharp student, had this great scene that they kind of improv'd. And they had this dramatic scene where they had one guy that was trying to get out of a house before the other guy showed up and caught him. And they're cross-cutting back and forth, and it's interesting, and it's kind of fun. And meanwhile, there's a third guy, it's kind of the sidekick guy, who's in the car, he's on the stakeout, and he's distracted, not radioing the guy that the other guy's coming because he's too busy eating snacks and stuff. Well, he's eating gummy bears and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of like this comedic relief moment in this otherwise tense moment, which is fun, and it was a cool dynamic, and everything was going well. And then there was this great kind of funny acting performance that might have been improv, I don't know, where the character in the car is eating gummy bears, and he takes out a gummy bear, and he does the little voice of the gummy bear. He says, oh no, don't eat me, I have a wife and family. And you think he's going to eat him, and the guy's, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know you had kids. And then he just puts the gummy bear down, on the dash of the car, and it was funny. It was admittedly really funny because the performance was really funny, and the whole thing was organic, and it was really hilarious, but it ruined the pacing of the scene. All that tension that we were building between the person who was coming back and the person who was leaving got completely destroyed. And so we sat there and we watched it again and again and again, and I said, there might be a way to edit this a different way. There might be a way to move this maybe to before that cross-cutting begins, and we kind of played around with it. And finally he said, this was his idea, finally he says, you know what, I think I just need to cut it. And I knew that's kind of what needed to happen, but I was hesitant to tell him to cut, one of his big jokes, And he says, no, I just need to cut it. I said, you sure? Like, maybe you can tweak it? He says, no, I just need to cut it. I just need to cut it out. And he cut it out, and it worked from that moment on. Like, it was as if everything was perfect after that. And all I did was just remove that one bit. It was a funny bit. It was a funny joke. But he had to kill his darlings in order for the sake of the larger film. That will happen to many of you. It's hard. It's hard. I'm not very good at it myself. It's a weakness of mine that I've come to realize. It's not easy to get rid of something that you're attached to. It's a lot easier to be the person removed from the project, reading your screenplay, saying, you need to get rid of this, you need to change this, you need to do that. I'm good at that part, but when it comes to my own work, it's hard. It's hard to look inward and say, this doesn't fit, I need to change this character. I love this character, but it's not working. And I need to get rid of it for the sake of the larger whole. It's a challenge, and it's something that you're going to have to deal with. So get comfortable, try your best, get comfortable to learn how to cut scenes that aren't working for you, how to cut characters or combine characters that are messing up the structure of your film. Just ask yourself, does it progress your story, your conflict, or your arc? Is it moving the story along? Yes or no? No. Is it creating some type of conflict for our character to overcome? No. Is it making our character grow in some way and showing his or her arc? No. Well, then there you go. Chop it out. Drop it out. Save it for something else where it does do those things. Or tweak it until it does. If not, cut it. Okay. We are going to shift gears now. And we are going to talk about screenplay format. So there is a whole bunch of rules about how to properly format a screenplay. Okay, so that was all the writing stuff, that was all the story stuff. Now we have to talk about some rules. These rules are important. Okay, there are rules that you have to follow, and there's a couple of reasons why you have to follow them. For starters, if you follow the rules correctly, you end up with one page being the equivalent of about 1 minute of film. That's really helpful to you to know. Oh, I got 20 pages here. Oh, am I really going to have a 20-minute film? Well, if you formatted it correctly, yeah, you are. If you have 5 minutes of pages, you've got a 5-minute film. So that can be a really useful tool to help you not only plan your production, but get an idea of how your film is going to look at in terms of the length and the pacing of it. We did this with your note cards when you did storyboarding last year, right? Where we divided up your first act and your second act and your third, and we were able to look at it visually and just say, well, you got 50 here in the first act, you got 10 in the second act, that's a problem, right? Remember when we did that last year, right, with your story? You can do the same thing with your screenplay format, only you're doing it with pages, right? Right? I already mentioned that once, but it's worth noticing if you do the format correctly, that could be really valuable for you to help you structure your film. But there's even another reason why this is more important, and this is sort of like, hey, if you do this right and you send your script off to a director or a producer or someone that you want to collaborate with, and they look at it and they see that it's formatted correctly, great, that's awesome. Hey, this person knows what they're doing. Okay, I'm excited. On the other hand, if your screenplay is not formatted correctly, if it's full of grammatical mistakes, if it's full of spelling mistakes, if it doesn't have the proper punctuation, a director might stand here and look at it and say, well, it's one of two things here. Either A, this person's just not very smart, in which case I'm not going to bother to read this because it must not be very good, because they can't even, spell properly, or they can't even write incoherent sentences. Nothing's grammatically correct. They must not be that bright. That's a reality, right? Or I might look at it and say, well, this aspiring screenwriter doesn't seem to feel that it's important. It's not important enough to them to format it correctly. It's not important enough to them to proofread their work. It's not important enough to them to just run the spell check. I mean, there's really no excuse, guys. It's got like the red letters every time you spell something wrong, right? Right? If you don't care about your film, like you're the writer, if you don't care about your film, The director, the people you want to collaborate with, the people you want to sell it to, the producer, they're not going to care about your film. They're not even going to read it. Why should they? Right? No one should care more about your film than you. So all of these things, they matter. They matter, okay? Your format matters. Your spelling matters. Your grammar matters. Okay? These things matter. Pro tip, they don't just matter in the film industry. Okay? Anytime you're applying for any job. This is a reality. I know you guys want to think, oh, spelling's not important, grammar's not important, writing's not important. It's all communication, right? Like if you don't proofread that stuff, if you're trying to apply for a job, they want to know that A, you're smart, and B, that you care, right? Those are the things that they care about, right? So they matter in that context. They might not matter in the grand scheme of end-all, be-all universe things, but they matter if you want to get stuff done. All right, I'm going to show you a quick little clip here from my wonderful favorite person, John Hess from filmmakeriq.com, who is my spirit animal. He's going to break down screenwriting format for us. I'm not going to show you this whole clip, but it is worth watching. He talks about the history of screenplays and how we got into the format that we have today. But I'm just going to skip ahead to the last chunk of it, where it will show us how the formatting is done, so you can get an idea of how that works, and then I'll walk you through the process and how to use some bits of software that we have to help you do your writing.
If you're writing a script today that you want other people to produce, then you need to be writing in the master scene format. The master scene format has 6 main elements, and we'll touch on them very briefly. The first element is the scene heading, often called a slug line. All screenplays written in the master scene format are broken into individual scenes, not cuts. Each scene heading is written in all caps and begins with INT for interior or EXT for exterior. This is followed by the name of the location and the designation of day or night or some other time frame. The second element is the action portion of the script. This is written in present tense language and should only include what can be seen and heard. In other words, no writing about what people are thinking. This is a film we're making, not a novel. Sound effects that are key to the story but heard off screen need to be put in all caps, as well as the name of the character when you first introduce that character. The next element is the character name. This goes on its own line in all caps. If the character is off-screen or delivering a voiceover, you can designate it so with an OS for off-screen or VO for voiceover. Underneath the character names are parentheticals that shade the meaning of the dialogue delivery. Remember, the key to the master scene format is readability, so only include parentheticals that are absolutely necessary for the understanding of the context of your dialogue. Then there are the actual dialogue blocks, which are written in their own section, offset from everything else. The final element is the scene transition. Now this is a holdover from the continuity script days. These go on the far right of the script and explain transitions between scenes. Again, the purpose of this format is readability, so only include transitional elements when they are absolutely important to the story you're trying to tell. Remember the role of the screenplay in the modern package unit production system. It is a document to sell the story to investors and potential collaborators. One of those collaborators may be a director, and although you may have a great idea how to shoot a scene when you're writing it, your job is not to tell the director how to do his or her job. You can hint at what's important by drawing attention to things in your writing, but leave out the camera direction. Now, the precise formatting of all these elements is absolutely crucial. You must have a 1.5-inch left margin with a 1-inch top and bottom margin and dialogue blocks 3.7 inches from the left side of the page. Each element has its own specific rule for spacing. And if you're attempting to write a screenplay, you could try to set up all these margins yourself, but what you're really doing is asking for a world of hurt if you're going that route. There are industry standard screenwriting software programs like Final Draft and Movie Magic, as well as free versions out there like Celtics that can handle all your formatting for you. And realistically, writing a screenplay is hard enough. Don't make it more complicated. Use these software packages. Now, there are a few reasons for these very strict rules. On average, one page of screenplay formatted this way will result in 1 minute of screen time. So a 120-page script should land right around 2 hours of finished movie. And when it comes to pre-production, a properly formatted script can be broken down into 1/8 of a page and scheduled for production. This format also leaves a lot of white space which the director and actor can scribble their notes in or draw funny cartoons. But perhaps the most important reason for these rigid formatting rules, it's the first clue for the script reader to tell if the writer is a serious screenwriter or just a wannabe dreamer. If you don't care enough about your movie to format it in the way that the industry wants, make it easy to read and free of major typos, well then nobody in the industry will care about your movie either. With all the books that have been written about screenplays, it's sometimes easy to forget that a screenplay is still a production document, a living blueprint for a film that has yet to be made. Now, as the role of the writer has changed from the studio system to the package unit system, the needs of the screenplay and how it has been formatted have been changing as well. If you are producing your own work, you can write in whatever style and format you so desire. But a word of caution. Filmmaking is not a solitary pursuit, and you will need to bring other people into your project. Your screenplay is your first impression. Your first impression of you, the filmmaker, your professionalism, and your movie. So make sure you make it a good impression. My name is John Hess. I'll see you over there at filmmakeriq.com.
Okay, so there are a number of pieces of software available for you to use to make life easy for you that will do all of the formatting for you. There is Final Draft, which is kind of like the big one that most people use in the industry. We have it for you to use. It's installed on all of these computers. I was here until 11:30 last night making sure that everything was good to go. So you have access to it. You also have access to it at home. If you want to install this at home, you may do so. You need to email me. I'll give you a special key. It will be active on your computer until the end of the school year, basically. So you may use Final Draft at home. We used to use Adobe Story quite a bit, which is Adobe's answer for screenwriting. They've since discontinued it. They didn't take very good care of it during the time that they had it, which is unfortunate because I thought it had a lot of potential. But they didn't support it long enough, and they announced about a year ago that they were just getting rid of it entirely, which makes me sad because I already pay for Adobe, so it was nice to have that sort of built in to my subscription. Celtx is a free version that some of you may have used in the past. You can get it free and it gives you full functionality for like 30 days. After 30 days, it's no longer free and it pretends that it's locking you out of your scripts, but it doesn't really. You just have to know where to click to get back into your scripts. You can still have access to them. But if you ever use Celtx, just know that like you will not lose your work, even though like everyone panics after 30 days and they think they're losing their work. It's still there and you still have access to it. Script Buddy is another one that I've seen people use in the past. Movie Magic was mentioned. Highland is one that I've never used, but I heard about once upon a time. And there are others. I just heard about this one a couple months ago, and I've tried it out. It's actually pretty legit. Like if we hadn't already paid for Final Draft, I might be using this. It's called Yumi Script. It's a plug-in extension that you can add to your Google Chrome. And what it does is it takes you to this sort of website where you can type and stuff, and then you save it to your Google Drive. And then when you go back to that like website, you can open so it syncs with your Google Drive. And you can work collaboratively with people in real time. So if you share that file in your Google Drive with me, and I open it up and you're typing on it, I can see you typing on it and I can type it with you. That's really cool. Now, Final Draft can do that too. You can do that with your copies of Final Draft as well. But it's pretty cool that there's like now a free solution available in which you can have that feature. So I think that's kind of a game changer. So I played around with it a little bit. It seems to work really, really well. I'm curious to see if the spacing and everything like works out exactly right. Because if everything's not exactly right, like that can really change the numbers. For example, when I did mine in Word, I told you how I spaced everything myself, and I chose the right font and all that kind of stuff. I had 120 or 130 or 104. I remember I had like 140 pages or something, and then I brought it into a copy of Final Draft, and immediately it was down to 126. That's a lot of pages that are different, just because the font was slightly different and the spacing was slightly different. And you wouldn't notice it page to page to page, but when you add it all up over time, I lost like 10 or 15 pages without actually losing 10 or 15 minutes, right? So I want to play around with that and see if it actually like equals out. But they actually can import final draft documents into that Udemy script bit, so that's kind of cool. Okay, if you are into this stuff and you want to pursue more of this kind of thing and you want some resources available, for starters, watch a bunch of movies in your genres. Okay, if you're making a monster in the house, watch some monsters in the house. See how they pace their film. See what kind of language they use in their dialogue. Okay, what are the needs? What are the primal needs, right? Watch films in your genre, depending on which one of those 10 genres your film is. Pay attention to the dialogue on TV. This is your assignment for this week. Okay? I mean, I'm not going to check up on you or anything, but this is your assignment for the week. I want you to flip on the TV and find some dialogue scenes. Not a sitcom. Not like a 3-camera setup sitcom. You guys know what I'm talking about?
Big Bang Theory.
No, absolutely no Big Bang Theory. Absolutely not.
Nearly 14 minutes.
It needs to be a 1-camera setup, and it needs to be like a filmic, cinematic, like television show or movie. All right, and I want you to pay attention to the dialogue scenes and ask yourself a couple questions while you're watching these dialogue scenes. Okay, how are the characters speaking? Does it fit the type of character that they are? How did the language change? Can you hear the different voices? Not just the performance of the voices, but the different choices in words and language and things like that, right? And I want you to ask yourself, why is this dialogue happening right now? Because show's always better than tell. So why is this dialogue happening right now? What information needs to be out there? Or how does this help advance my story? Or how does this help advance the character growth? Like, why is this dialogue needed? The best films put the dialogue in when it's really needed and show the rest of the time, right? So ask yourself, why is this scene happening? Why is this character happening? And figure out why that dialogue is important. If you want to read more about Save the Cat, I have books on my shelf that you're welcome to check out. I do have copies of Save the Cat that you can check out. It's easy reading. You could read it in a couple of days, probably, if you wanted to. But you can also go to the website. This is Blake Snyder's website. Blake Snyder is no longer with us. God rest his soul. But his website is still active, Save the Cat. It has forums. There's a big community on there that you can talk to people on. You can download a bunch of beat sheets, including shorter, longer beat sheets, TV beat sheet, all this kind of stuff for different formats, and it can give you an idea of kind of where things should happen on your timeline, so that can be a good resource. And if you want to see some finished screenplays of some movies that you're familiar with, check out simplyscripts.com. You can go on there, you can for free Google, search your favorite movie that you're familiar with. You download it, and you can see the original screenplay that they started with. Sometimes it's really different than the finished product. Sometimes it's really close to the finished product. But you can see how they wrote particular scenes. If you have a complicated scene, you're not sure how to write it. I've got 2 characters, and they're both on the phone, but they're in different places. How do I write that with different scene headings and going back and forth? How does that work? Is it 1 scene? Is it 2 scenes? Is it 10 scenes? Maybe you can think of an example, and then you can look up the screenplay and see how other people have done this. Google is your friend. You can always Google a lot of these screenwriting questions. There's a lot of methodologies and ways that people have tackled difficult writing and things like that in terms of their screenplays. So there are a number of different ways that you can tackle those problems. So look around, investigate, and see what other people have tried. Okay, it's time to write. So I would like you to grab a computer. I will show you the software that we have and how to get started. And you will have the remainder of this period to work on your screenplay.
No, we're sitting over there. No, we're sitting